Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are on our fantastic planet. And welcome to this month's live stream, where we're going to focus on building your value. I probably say this every single month, but maybe because we just think that the focus of this and the value of this gets bigger and better every single month. Certainly the audience does. So huge thank you to everyone who's registered and those people who are dialing in and will watch this on reruns as well. This is a multi-platform stream. So depending on how you've arrived here, thank you very, very much for being here. We know everyone's time is super precious. So we very much appreciate you spending some of your precious time with us on this live stream. And in order to give back, we're going to focus today on how do we build your value. So I am conscious that we've got people dialing in and connecting in from all around our wonderful planet. I think we've got people in the stream live from Mongolia. I think we've got people here from South Africa. I think we've got some early risers in the US, probably more on the east coast of the US, and of course here in the UK and across Europe. So if you are here from wherever you're here actually from in the world, what organization, what country you're from, please let us know in the chat. Maybe you can give your city or your country a shout out, or your organization too. Just drop it in the chat and let us know where you're at. So again, a huge thank you to everyone for being here. This month, we're focusing on this big topic of how do we build value for a few reasons. And we're going to get into this in a bit more detail, of course, as we go through. The format for these live streams is pretty straightforward. I like to share some insights, some data from our research, and also what we've picked up from around the world. And we've got a very clear point of view on what we think you can do proactively to build value. Every single thing that we focus on, whether that's in these live streams or in the recorded content that we create on our World Class Manager program, it's very much around a very central ethos here, which is about practical action. So we like to focus on things that we can do something with, i.e. like within the next few hours, because we're all very busy and we all want to make things happen quickly. So this is very much the guiding principle for our content, the process, the structure, everything that we share. And what we can then do as we get through this, if you've got any questions, please feel free to drop those into whatever respective chat function that you have access to. We've got one of my colleagues, Ashley, live on the line, so she can pick up some of the questions as we go through and feed them through at the end of the session. And if we can't answer anything, then we'll try our best to make sure that we come back to you after the session if we can do that. So as I said, today is focused all on building your value. We're going to have a very, very short intro and then we'll kick off. So depending on how you may be tuning into this, I don't mean technology-wise, I mean in terms of where you're coming at this from. You may be thinking about this more from your perspective or from your teams or organizations. So we're going to try and cover off all of those as well. If you don't know anything about us, you're thinking, who the hell is this guy on camera right now talking about building value? Well, we're from an organization, I'm from an organization called the World Class Manager Team. We focus on building line management capability, and we do that all around the world. So we've now worked with over 100,000 managers in more than 50 countries around the world on our platform. We have a program which essentially develops line manager capability. And that's what we've done for a number of years. We do it probably, as I set up in the intro, based on observable best practice. We've observed awesome managers in action over the years, and we built a very, very simple and structured program based on the idea of building line management capability. So we've probably got some of the managers from our program live on the line as well. So a huge thank you for those of you who are dialed in, who've been through our program already. If you know anything about us, you'll know that we also produced a book which came out last year, funnily enough, called How to Become a World-Class Manager. And we've been delighted in the reaction and reception to the book. We launched in Europe mainly, and the US, and also in the Middle East. And we're also delighted because in 2 weeks' time, we launch in the full Arabic version, which is published by Jarir Publishing, which arguably are the biggest and best book publisher across the entire Middle East. So we're delighted to launch the book in full Arabic, which will come out in about 2 weeks' time. And we'll be doing a preview of that in Egypt next month. So if you happen to be at this big conference that we're talking at in Egypt next month, then we'll do a preview of the book in terms of the Arabic version. So again, a huge thank you to everyone involved in this, because it's been a gargantuan effort from lots and lots of different people and lots of different stakeholders. So a huge thank you. But the crux of this, book aside, content aside, is all looking at how do we help managers to become more effective. And as I said, you might be listening to this from a few different perspectives. It might be about how do you help to build your individual value. So this is a very central and personal focus on you. This might be about the royal we in terms of the organization, or it might be kind of somewhere in the middle here, which is more about your team. So depending on how you're listening to this and how your focus on building value should be, or where you feel it should be, then again, we think we've got something in store for each one of us. Now, we're going to start off with some obligatory statistics. Not obligatory, actually, because we went deep to try and find these and to find things that were relevant and useful. So 2 sets of stats. One is based on what we've seen from other organizations. And of course, this wouldn't be a World-Class Manager live stream without sharing some of our own in-house statistics. Of the 100,000 managers who've been through our program, we have data on around 16,000 managers who've been through the program. So we've got lots of exclusive data to share, and we'll try and pepper this as we go through the live stream with some of that. Now, to start off with, 3 key things. One is that we found something very interesting here, looking at the impact of aligning our own individual role and purpose with what the organization is designed to do in terms of the impact on pay. And I'll share with you the sources of these so you can check them out if you're so interested. The second one is then looking at the impact in terms of career progression. And the third was looking at retention. So I don't usually like to read from paper or script because I'm a free guy, but I do for the purpose of this because I wanted to give you the sources of these, which I thought were really interesting. So the first one here is in terms of the 20% figure. And this is Harvard Business Review study found that individuals with strategic thinking skills earn 20% more than their peers. Now, again, we can take this. We don't know the background to the study. You can check out the article and see what it says. But I guess it does make sense, right? People who are aligned more to strategy would probably perform a bit better for a few reasons, which we'll get into. The second statistic here is from the Corporate Executive Board, and they found that proactive employees who align their goals with organizational strategy are 15% more likely to be high performers. Now, is this chicken? Is this egg? Is this chicken or the egg? We don't know, but we'll get into this. I kind of have a view on what I think this is. And then the final one in terms of this 59% figure, which I thought was very interesting, is from Gallup. And Gallup revealed that engaged employees who align with company goals are 59% less likely to seek new opportunities. So if you're thinking about this whole challenge of building value from the we, you're thinking about your entire organization, you're a CEO, you're a HR director, you're a CFO, you're in charge and in a way responsible for the development of a huge number of people. And of course, you want to retain talent. Then it seems to be that aligning people with organizational goals, according to Gallup anyway, has a significant, 59% is significant impact on their likelihood that they would stay with the organization. So those are what we found, again, with relevant stats. And we'll kind of come back to each one of these 3 with some of the things I wanted to share with you as part of the live stream. And then in terms of our own data, again, this is based on about 16,000 managers' views. It's a global view, so we take a very sort of broad brush picture here at looking at what managers who've been through our program say. And only 42% of managers, and the managers that we've listened to, say that they understand the organization's goal. So the most important central definition of why the organization exists, you may term it as a goal, you may term it as a vision, you may term it as a mission, depends how you articulate it. Whichever it is, about 42% of managers, on average, based on our research, would say that they understand what the organization's goal is. Now, this might excite you, this might frustrate you. I would probably expect this would frustrate you if you're in a senior position and you think you've done a very good job of articulating your organization's goal to everyone across your organization. And the challenge is that about 42% of managers following all of that effort would probably say that they understand it. And again, we're going to get into the reasons why I think this is very low. And I also think that 42% number is probably a bit misleading as well. I think it's probably much lower than that if you were to really dig into the detail of how people connect what I do with what the organization does. And really that is the central crux of how we're focused here on building value. Now, I'm going to sound much like a socialist here, which may be not a bad thing. But when we think about building value, organizations, of course, create value. Now, you might be a commercial entity. You might be an investor-owned company, like a private equity-owned business, where your focus over a 3, 5, 10-year event horizon time period is designed to essentially grow the value of the organization. And hopefully everyone, or as many people as possible, benefit from the valuation increase in that organization. So you share in that value. It could be that you're an organization in the public sector where you're publicly funded by taxpayers' funds And your focus, of course, is to deliver value to society or deliver value for the public. In the act of the organization delivering that value, and it might not be that the payoff for you is a commercial and monetary payoff, but it could be that there's some payoff in terms of growth, progression, building your skill set, and therefore making you worth more in all sorts of different measures that you might define as important to you. The crux again here is that we want to make sure that everybody, or as many people as possible, can share in the value creation act that the organization is essentially in. And we're going to get into, again, the detail of why we think this is important. Now, the reason why I think this is important is because this value creation process always happens, whether we like it or not. And it might be that you're lucky enough to be in a position where you can benefit from this, or it might be that you're unlucky and don't benefit from this. Now, what am I talking about here? We know, based on everything that we've seen, as I'm sure you would probably attest to in all of your experience, that when you think back in your employment experience, any company you've ever worked in, who is the most important person in a way, apart from yourself, but who is the most important person who would be likely to affect how it feels for you to be at work every single day? You know, we know from all of the studies, we know from our own research, it's much to do, not everything, but much to do with the relationship with the line manager. And the line manager, in many cases, is the only person who can probably help to translate this vision, mission, strategy, goal into something relevant for the people in the organization. So when we talk about the value creation process, the person who's ultimately responsible, in a way, for translating this is going to be the line manager. Of course, as an individual, we have a responsibility to understand this, but as far as the organization is concerned, we're focused here on the manager. Now, of course, I'm biased. I'm tremendously biased. I'm totally compromised here when we talk about the role of the manager, because everything that we focus on, of course, our program is called World Class Manager. We focus on building line management capability, and therefore we think that this is one of the most central and important challenges for the role of the very busy, very time poor, but modern manager. If we talk to a CEO, or we talk to a CFO, or we talk to investors, or we talk to the chief marketing officer, or we talk to the chief information officer, or we talk to there's lots of chiefs, lots of officers, when we talk to anybody senior in the organization, they all want to make sure that the manager layer ultimately understand all of these key complex ideas around strategy. And it's very difficult as a leadership team to be able to articulate this to people. It was difficult always. I don't think if you went back in history, you would find a moment where organizations said, yep, it's working perfectly. We've absolutely nailed this. I don't think you'd ever find that in human history. It's always a challenge. And I think it's probably becoming more of a challenge given that our attention is taken away on so many different things across the organization. The central challenge for many organizations is how do we try and make sure that we can get as much attention as possible on the very central reason why we exist as an organization. And what we probably want, I would imagine, is you want as many people as possible in the organization or across the organization or throughout the organization to be able to have a central and personal representation of what does all of that mean for the team, because that's kind of interesting, but ultimately, what does this mean for me? Now, this is where we get into the building value part. When we go back to those statistics from Harvard Business Review and the Corporate Executive Board, is that it seems to be that there is a very strong case and a strong link between the extent to which I understand this and the impact that this might have on my career progression, on my pay prospects, and on my ability to develop myself and ultimately grow my value. The challenge then becomes, how do we make sure that everybody, or as many people as possible, can start to understand what all of this stuff means? And how do we then make sure that they get that into the hearts and minds of everyone across the company or across the organization? And then as an individual, of course, it's incumbent on me, regardless of my position or hierarchy or length of service in the organization, that if I can really start to grasp that, then this is where I start to become valuable. Now, why is that the case? And I know I'm stating the obvious here, but again, I'm conscious that we're all in very different states of flux and in development of where we're at on our management journeys. And I think it's important to remind ourselves, even the most experienced of us, are to really think about where you create value is where you're aligning your individual action to what the organization's goal is. If you pair this all the way back to a really small organization of a couple of people, or even smaller, a one-man band as a company, if you're not connected with the fundamental purpose and therefore your behavior on a minute by minute or hour by hour matches up with what the goal is, then of course you're not going to achieve that goal. You could look at it like a fitness exercise, you could look at it like nutrition. There's all areas of behavioral change where if the behavior moment by moment doesn't match up with what the goal is, then it's probably just a pipe dream. So if you think about that from an organizational point of view, how do we make sure that our behavior on a moment by moment basis is in a way aligned to a large degree with what the organizational goal is? And I think there are three key things that we can focus on here, practical actions that I think we can do to get started. So the first one, when we talk about these sort of really important areas, number one is looking at the goals. And now you might say this is very obvious. Well, of course it is, because all organizations should have some articulated goal. In our program, we focus actually module 2, I think, of World Class Manager is focused on what we call great goal setting. The whole idea is that we've got a very rigorous approach to setting great goals. Now, when you think in terms of the experience with your line manager or with other people in your team, what's the quality like? And I'm not asking you to share that publicly, but if just thinking about it, what's the quality like of those goal setting conversations? Do those goal setting conversations have a genuine link, a clear link to what the goal of the organization is? Now, you may say, well, this is fundamentally flawed because we actually don't have an explicit goal of what we're trying to achieve as an organization. If that's the case, then maybe we've uncovered something awesome, which is maybe you can challenge your CEO or CFO or leadership team to have better clarity, because I'm sure it's there. We don't come across many leadership teams and all of the 1,000 companies we've come across who sit there and say, actually, the goal isn't clear. We don't know what we're here really to do. They're all very, very clear. The difference is some are very good at articulating that all the way through the organization and some struggle with it. So when it comes to thinking about the goal of the organization as a manager, how good are you at being able to really think about what the goal is and what it might mean for you personally? The way to achieve this, again, as an even more practical how-to, is to sit there and probably discuss it with someone, which sounds so simple and so straightforward. And it might be that you need about half an hour, I would say max, maybe an hour, but half an hour to an hour to sit with somebody and really talk through what the organizational goal or strategy is and just discuss it out loud. It's very rare that you would be walking down the corridor. If I leave the door now and walk down there and say, hey, fancy getting a sandwich and talking about, or a coffee, and thinking about the organizational strategy and what it means for us in our individual teams and what it means for us personally, probably someone would say, no way, leave me alone, go away. But we know this is an important conversation to have because it's the exact conversation that the leadership team of every organization has all the time. Right? So when we talk about goals, we're talking about something very, very practical, hyper practical. And again, if you think back in terms of, like, say, the last year in your life, what have those conversations looked like, either with you and someone more senior or with you and somebody more junior? How linked are those conversations to the organizational goal? I would argue in many cases they're not linked that well at all. And they're not linked that well because we're bad at doing this. They're not linked because often we don't know what the goal is, which gives us a very clear idea and clue for maybe what we need to solve in this. The second thing is this sort of PDP. Now, I don't know about you, but the personal development plan, or however you term it, right? For some people, it brings excitement. It brings joy to their hearts of the prospect of having a conversation and filling out a PDP. That's just thrilling for people. For other people, they may feel like this is the last thing that they want to do. It brings a shudder. It reminds us of difficult conversations we've had before with managers. And I don't know what camp you might be in, but there's all sorts of views on the PDP. Now, again, I'm not saying that PDP is the right terminology, and you may have a very different process, but ultimately what we're talking about here is a very personal representation of what this goal or strategy means for me as an individual. And therefore, how might I plan out the next 3 to 6 months in how I might think about the development that I might want to access. And that could be external training or programs. It could be internal opportunities to grow and develop oneself. So when we think about the PDP, I do think the idea of having something structured is a good idea. Why could that be a bad idea? It's impossible, really, because we want to make sure that people do have an overt conversation and then link the development plan over the next 3, 6, 12 months to what the organizational goal is. The fundamental flaw, of course, comes where the organizational goal either isn't clear or the organizational goal is wrong. And we've come across many cases where the leadership team may exist in a little bit of a vacuum. They may exist in an echo chamber, and their sense of reality is sometimes sometimes warped in the sense that the goal is the wrong goal and no one's challenged them on that. So again, that's for another live stream perhaps. But we're assuming here, like we say in economics, I'm an economist by training, ceteris paribus, all things being equal, that actually the goal is good and it's a good one and it's a clear one. If the goal is good and it's clear, then it makes sense that we would try and have a personal representation of that goal in the form of some sort of thing called a PDP. The trick here, again, and we'll get into some of the barriers, but there are some barriers here and some challenges which affect our ability to really action this. And then the third thing, which I think is more of I would call this like a sanity check, a sanity test, is to then think about what level of cross-collaboration is there across the organization. Ultimately, as an organization, we all exist here to try and serve a group of people, and it might be that your customers or the clients or the beneficiaries of your organization are quite varied, and therefore there is a difference in what you do. But for most organizations, there's something quite similar that we have in common about what we're here to try and achieve. One of the big issues that came out time and time again from our experience of looking at employee engagement surveys is the silo working problem. So again, you can replicate this and appear like a sort of mystic magic person, that you go into a leadership team and on a piece of paper, you write the word silos and put it in your pocket. And then when you talk to the leadership team, you say, I'm getting a sense, I'm getting a feeling. Call it intuition, and you pull it out of your pocket and it's a piece of paper and it says silos on it. And people say, oh, wow. How did you know? Like, how did you get that? It's just a hunch. This is the same issue in pretty much every organization we ever come across. Because of the central challenge I've just talked about, it's rare that people get up off their seat, go and talk to whoever's just walking past the door now, go and grab them and say, hey, fancy talking about stuff. Or, I understand that you work in finance. I want to learn, how do you do it? What's your articulation of this goal? It doesn't happen in organizations. And most organizations will tell us that they want better cross-team collaboration. They want better cross-departmental working. They want better knowledge sharing. And it doesn't happen by magic, of course. It happens because individuals decide to go after it and solve some of these issues. So again, as a manager, if I'm really thinking about building my value and demonstrating to the senior people of the organization that I'm very serious here about adding value to the organization, then I think this is like one of the easiest wins here. It's a no-brainer because it demonstrates that I'm able to cross-collaborate across the organization and probably accomplish something in doing that many leaders never manage to accomplish, even in a leadership team, SLT, ExCo, ExCom, whatever you call your leadership team. They're not very good at doing this either. So again, if this is something that we can do as a manager and build the capability of the team to understand a broader picture of the organization, not because the organization's just descended upon us and said, Wayne, sit there and listen for a minute, let me tell you the real deal. It doesn't happen like that. It's probably better that we go and seek it out ourselves and build up a better picture of what this organization's all about. So 3 key things, which I think, as I said at the beginning, that I think you can get into pretty quickly, hyper practical, and make an impact on. I want to talk about not the dark side. It sounds really dark, doesn't it? But do you know what I mean? It's the opposite side of this. There are 3 key things which I think we can do here, which have a significant impact. And these also align to something I wanted to talk about a little bit later in terms of the customer angle here. But for a minute, let's focus on the opposite side of this. So I think there are 3, in a way, like barriers to all of this. So when we think about the first one, about the entire idea that we would have a better goal-setting conversation, we run into this time problem. Of course, Wayne, we want to have more time to be able to sit there, debate with the team about the challenges and issues and so on, but we often run into a time problem. And I know this sounds so obvious, it sounds so simple, but it might be at the beginning of the year to schedule these things like, 3, 6, 9, 12 months in advance. So at least every 12 weeks, we've got some allotted time with the team to start to talk about what the goal is, how it all makes sense to us as a team, what it means for us as individuals. So again, super simple, but I think this is a barrier we often run into. The other barrier that we run into is focused on what we would call knowledge gaps. So when we look at the knowledge gaps in an organization, often we call this the knowing-doing gap, right? And there is a difference between what the leadership team of the organization feel everyone understands and what most people understand, which is vastly different. The reason why most leadership team members often have a richer picture, if that's a description of it, a richer picture of what the organizational goal and vision and all of that means is because they've often had the opportunity to sit there for like days and sit and think about it and discuss it, often in a nice hotel with nice drinks and coffees and food and whatnot, and really start to understand it. And they emerge after after a couple of days with a consensus about what all this means. Most people don't get that luxury. What they get is a set of words. If they're lucky, they might get some sort of video or something on the intranet, or maybe even a presentation town hall where someone stands up and no one asks questions at the end. You know the drill. Right? So often there's a really big knowledge gap. And here is when we focus on building your value, the topic of today. Again, I think this is another absolute no-brainer if you want to build your value, which is to go out of your way as a manager to start to understand what that strategy is. Now, my challenge to you would be is that I would challenge you to try and understand your organizational strategy, goal, mission, vision better than your CEO does, such that you could, in theory, have a debate with your CEO and maybe win the debate or win the argument and outclass them in terms of your knowledge and understanding of it. The reason why I say this is because I come back to a quote which came from a guy called Sir Dennis Lasdun. Sir Dennis Lasdun was a famous architect. I'm not particularly into architecture, but he architected a building in London, which is now occupied by the Royal College of Physicians. It's a beautiful, amazing piece of architecture. And one of the things he said in his work was it was his job to give the client on time and on cost, not what they wanted, but what they never dreamed that they wanted. And when they saw it, it was something that they realized they wanted all along. I mean, it's one of the most beautifully arrogant things that you could say, but he was famous for going out of his way to understand the client better than they understood themselves and really blew them away with his work. And it's kind of like that in an organization. Like, could we go out of our way to make sure that we understand the strategy here such that I could get into a really full-on debate with a CEO or a CFO or a CMO or a CIO or other CIOs and have a conversation with them about strategy and what that stuff means. Again, no one's going to help you do it. We might be lucky that you've got some awesome, unbelievable internal communications function, which is spoon feeding us data and insight and knowledge and creating these rich picture conversations. I would suspect you probably don't. So again, it's incumbent on us as managers, if we want to build our value, that we would have more insight, more knowledge. And then the final thing I would talk about here in terms of the barrier can also be your networks. Often what we would say is, if you were to be really honest about, I'm not asking about you specifically, but most people, I would say, if you were to put like a webcam on and follow people around for a week in the life of them at work, right? Even more of a challenge if you're at home, if you're working remotely, but assuming you are in a physical office around people, most people interact with a very small number of people on a Monday to Friday basis. The size of the network is, again, I would argue, quite closely related to how well you are able to understand the organizational strategy, vision, mission, put the picture in place in terms of what the organization actually does, and therefore equip you to have these really robust conversations with leaders and ultimately be seen as someone of real strategic value for the organization. And it's a big function here of building the network. I met with a friend of mine 2 days ago, and we were talking about how she builds her network on LinkedIn. She wants to focus more on doing it and was really shy to reach out to people. And that's like for strangers. Often we work in the same organization, and you've probably got access to loads of really brilliant people across the organization. And again, it might be a great idea to reach out to some of these senior people and ask them to have a coffee with you. That might be possible, or a virtual coffee, to try and build the network. And again, it's a fundamental principle here of growing the network and therefore growing our individual knowledge when we think about this. And then the final one I wanted to focus on here, before hopefully we can get into some good Q&A and some thoughts and your thoughts on this, is around the customer angle. And I think the customer angle is a huge one for a few key reasons here, because what often happens in organizations is we are serving someone, right? All organizations exist to serve someone. That might be the external customer in a traditional commercial enterprise where we're exchanging value products or services for money, right? Straightforward. It might be that we're in a public sector organization where we're exchanging services, of course, for value, which is the public value. Regardless of all of that, most organizations are quite awash with customer insight, customer feedback. Most managers in most organizations are not awash with most customer insight and customer feedback. Why is this important? Well, of course, if you can be the one who really understands the customer better than anyone else in the organization, would that make you more valuable strategically to the organization? Definitely would. Would it make you valuable to any other organization who does anything similar to what your organization does? Absolutely would. And is access to that data and knowledge and insight pretty easy to access? Absolutely is. So, the whole idea here is that organizations are usually awash and have access to customer insight. And how can we do a better job of getting that stuff? So the first thing that I would talk about is how do we create some sort of interaction? Could you create a better interaction with customers or with customer feedback data to make sure that people in your team, or it might be you included, understand the customer in a way as well as anyone else who has regular customer insight. The challenge in most organizations is you've got a population of people who have real access to real customers and they interact with them on a regular basis. They get a sense and a feel for what the customer wants now and, of course, wants next. They're basing their behavior moment by moment on understanding what the market is saying because the market's constantly reacting. Then we've got another swathe of people that are totally disconnected from the customer. Often in many organizations, they feel like second-class citizens because the part of the operation that deals with the customer don't feel like they understand the customer. They say actually their role is to enable the front line to deliver for the customer. And there's all these challenges. We see it in professional service firms. We see it in manufacturing companies. We see it everywhere, that there is often this important and challenging divide. And it's kind of justified because many of the people who serve the customer don't spend enough time really understanding what the customer says. For all sorts of reasons, of course. It's not malicious. It's because we're so busy with everything else going on. So the first thing is, could we create a different level of interaction with the customer? Is that possible? In many organizations, it probably is. It might be a little uncomfortable, but it's definitely possible. The second thing is around what I would say around the insights. So again, if you're even a small to medium-sized organization, you've probably got customer feedback data. And even if you don't, you could probably interview, a handful, 10, 20, 30 customers, clients, people you serve to get a good sense of, is the organization delivering what they need? Certainly in the larger organizations, they are awash with customer insight and customer data. I was in the Middle East last year with an organization that has hundreds of people who are dedicated and paid to improve the customer experience for the organization. And I asked them, before I went to go and speak to them, I'd read through tons and tons of their publicly available data of what their customer actually says about them on a public review site. I asked the 400 people in the room to raise their hand if they'd read this data that I'd had access to publicly because it's free and anyone can access it. Not one person in the audience put their hand up. I'm sitting there thinking, well, what an own goal that is, because if your goal is to build your value and be seen by the organization to be someone who's strategically of value and importance to the organization, why wouldn't you be all over that data? It's publicly available data. And for all sorts of reasons, people aren't because they're busy and so on. But often we can take our eye off the ball because we've got to focus on other priorities. So I think access to those insights, again, is a huge area where we would recommend you focus on. And then the third thing is in terms of the journey, the customer journey, or the guest journey if you're in a hotel, or in the sort of public beneficiary journey if you're in a housing association. Certainly is what we call them in the UK, which would be organisations who provide social housing services. Every person we interact with often goes through a journey with the organisation. And the reason why I love the hoteliers is if you think about some of the best hoteliers we've come across, and this is one that we work with who are exceptional, what they said is, if you think about your customer journey, they said, right, the customer journey is quite straightforward. So let's assume that you've gone online to book a hotel, and this is a nice hotel, right? So your next interaction with the hotel would be that you arrive in a car, and your next interaction with the hotel is someone would open the door and say, welcome to the hotel. Your third interaction would be the check-in desk. Your fourth interaction would be someone bringing your bags to the room, and blah, 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 all the way to the final point where you check out and you'll be asked to fill out an online review for some sort of review website. But it's quite predictable in terms of the numbers of interactions. And most organizations, you can start to develop a very clear customer journey, which says, at which point does the customer interact with us? And at what point could we do a better job of serving and delivering for the customer? And again, in your organization, I would imagine there's a very clear customer experience journey. And as a manager, it might be that you actually work in customer experience and this is really easy for you. But for many managers we come across, they're quite divorced from all of that detail. So again, this might be worth looking at. Could you do some customer journey mapping and look at how the customer or the beneficiary experiences your organization? And ultimately, I guess this is the million-dollar question, is how does the organization create value for the people it's designed to create value for, right? The customer, beneficiary, the public, and so on. And therefore, as a manager, what can I do to make sure that I'm having a much bigger impact on that? Now, again, all of these things wrapped up, when we start to think about these 5 key areas here of why we would focus on this, in a way, what our role is as a manager, what some of the practical things that we can do. And this is all about the headline here of how do we make sure that we can build our value. Building our value is important for a number of reasons, but I'll focus on one because of time, is about time. Right? Time is unbelievably precious and unbelievably short. They say that the life expectancy, this is looking at the latest England and Wales, which is, of course, in the UK, if you're outside of the UK, our life expectancy for women is around 82 years. Life expectancy for men is about 79 years. Time is precious and time is limited. We spend much of our lives working in organizations, and of course, if the organization develops and builds its value, we should share in that. The challenge is, for all sorts of reasons which we've outlined in this live stream, there are many barriers to that. Certainly time, again, is one of those oxymorons, but it's often one of the barriers. So how can we make sure that we've got a sharper focus on utilizing our time and therefore building our value, building the value of the team, building the value, of course, of the organization, building the value for the people the organization serves, and of course, building the value for you personally. So I'm going to pause there because hopefully this has inspired some thought, some questions, some debate. It might be something that you're doing really well that works out and you just think absolutely want to nail this and share this because it works for us. It might be something that you've got a particular challenge with, and if so, please feel free and I'll read out the question as it comes out live on the screen. Or it might be something that you have a particular challenge with. Maybe we can't solve it live here today because time is also short, but it'd be great to understand what some of those common issues and challenges are. So again, I know we've got different streams and different platforms, so whichever chat function you have access to, please feel free to utilize that. We've got Ashley live on the line who can pick up any of this stuff coming through and then we can share it. So again, as we focus on this, and just a sort of final summary here, when we look at this idea of building value, again, one of the key issues is that we often are looking at how do we understand what individuals want. What it can be easy to assume in any team is that it's easy to assume what people actually want from the organization and want for the team. So one of the things we would definitely recommend is, again, a sharper focus on understanding what do the individuals in the team want. And there's a great question that we like to lead in with this, to leave you with. And the question is, what do you want to be famous for? And the reason why this is such an impactful and important question is because most people aren't actually clear in terms of what it is that they want. Most people don't have clarity in terms of what their own goal is. And often it can be easy to assume, well, why don't we just tie the organization's goal to individuals' goal? It's a huge assumption because it assumes that people do understand where they want to go next. And many people don't. You might be lucky that you had a parent or a couple of parents or someone in your life who was able to have a really rich conversation with you about your growth, your development, with your future, and so on. For most people, they've not had access to that type of conversation. And when I say that type of conversation, I'm talking about a truly deep and meaningful, probably a 1 to 2 hour in-depth debate and conversation about where you want to take your career, where you want to go next. I was very lucky when I got into the world of work that I had a manager, one of my first ever managers, who had this exact conversation with me. I didn't realize that they took me back to the age of 7 years old when my father, who came from the Caribbean, had taken me to where he worked and showed me around the place. And I sort of realized that, and he was quite clear about what he wants me to do and not to do. And I didn't realize that the entire reason why I wanted to grow a business and be an entrepreneur was based on that experience. I'd never thought about that until I was 21, 22 years old, having this conversation with one of my first managers, having buried this idea and thought of what happened at age 7 into what that meant in terms of my career progression. And it was one of the most magical conversations to sort of regress back through your life and think about why you're doing what you're doing and the reasons why, and therefore what your focus going forward might be. So again, a really rich picture conversation, deep and meaningful. Not everyone gets to have that. So again, it's something I would recommend, that big question, what do you want to be famous for? We've got a question coming in. Ash, please feel free to share it if it is indeed a question or a thought or a comment. Right, so Eliza Zen, so thank you very much. I'm reading this as you're reading this, so thank you very much. As you said, working in silos happens in every company. I use action learning sets, brilliant, to get people together and create a network within the organization. Do you have any other suggestions of ways we can bring people together to break the silos? Definitely. Right, so I think action learning sets are an exceptional idea, and I'm assuming here, Eliza, that you would have those maybe on a planned basis, or they might happen irregularly on certain projects. So action learning sets, if you're not familiar with them, can be really effective at using through projects. So you might have a defined project which is only going to last for 6 months, and we would call that a community of commitment. So we're going to work together for 6 months and then we'll disband off the project and we might never work on that project again. Or it could be a community of interest in an organization. So it depends on how the group of people get together. But action learning sets can work in a sporadic way, or they could be planned. One of the other areas that I would suggest getting together to break the silos is to look at common pain points that exist across the organization. To get insight to that, I would recommend you look at some of the employee feedback from the survey. The challenge for most HR teams in organizations is when they conduct an employee survey, they're absolutely like a deluge of information, challenges, issues. And often some of those issues in there are quite common across the organization. So I would recommend to identify like 2 or 3 really key pain points, things that really affect everyone across the organization, and perhaps get into debate about some of those issues. The other thing is that, again, depending on what commercial structure and focus the organization has, it might be an important thing to take one of those things. So the organization I was talking about from last year, improving customer experience is a central challenge across the organization globally. What a great way to bring different teams and departments together and to debate that issue. A brilliant question, Eliza. Thank you very, very much. We've got another question coming in. This is awesome. Let's see. It's coming up on screen. So this is from Hanley Mouton. Thank you very much. Working for the NHS, there is a problem with having influence on the patient journey, specifically due to the journey spanning different services and different funding streams, of course. I find it hard as often that you can only influence that part of the journey that you're involved in. How can we improve this? Well, of course, this is going to be a significant challenge, Hanley. So one of the things I would probably recommend, and this is going to run into the time challenge and conundrum again, is to try and outside of your day job, which I'm sure is tough anyway, but it's to try and spend a bit more time and effort to understand what happens in different parts of that journey. Again, not always easy to do and would require a quite significant time commitment. But I think in any organization, if this was a bank or a law firm or it was a manufacturing company, in order to get outside of my daily operation and understand the bigger picture, it would require a time investment outside of probably what I do 9 to 5. So I do think that would be important to look at. And I guess the great thing is, of course, in the NHS is that if you can do that, it means that the journey for the patients and everyone that you're trying to impact is going to be better and going to be richer and going to be smoother. So again, awesome question. Thank you very, very much. And third question, I think we'll have this as the final question because I'm conscious of your time and I don't want us to run into this time problem, time conundrum. So here we go. Third question. This is great. From Umit. Or Umit, how do we break old ways of thinking? I.e., should we change things? Why should we change things that are working fine? Great question. Such that it can open up the conversation of generating value beyond just doing. What a brilliant, brilliant question. I met this guy who's a cardiologist who's been studying men who've had heart attacks for a number of years. And one of the things, so I don't know what you think of the number here. I'm going to put you to the quiz, Umit. So one of the quiz questions he asked me was, following a heart attack, out of 100 men who had a heart attack, how many of them would change their behavior following a heart attack? So I said, what do you mean? He said, well, how many men out of 100 following a significant moment in their life, like a heart attack, would either eat a bit better, exercise a bit more, or would change their behavior, their ways of doing things? And I was thinking, I don't know, maybe about 50%. And he sort of stopped me dead in my tracks and said 21%. 21% of men, according to his research, would change their behavior following a heart attack after something as significant. So when we talk about behavioral change, and it was the reason why he was making the point, is out of 100 men, of course, 100 men would like to change their behavior. Only 1 in 20 are kind of able to do it. So he paints the picture that behavioral change is tough. To get people to do things differently is really difficult. I don't know if you've seen any of these studies where they look at how to affect your perception of time. And one of the things is like dealing with your subconscious, getting a bit deeper in the afternoon on a Wednesday, is thinking about how you change some of the habits of things. And again, this is one of the key areas that we look at. So what I would suggest in order to change that is you probably need to get someone who's in a senior position, who's listened to by the rest of the team, to table the idea that we must do things differently. And often one of the ways to do that is to start to take a look at the external environment. Often organizations exist out of a reality that is dead and gone years ago. I guarantee that your organization in October 2024 is definitely not the same organization it was in October 2023, and definitely not the same organization it was in 2022. The challenge is most people assume in a really weird way, like a psychologist would call this a psychological fantasy, and the idea and belief that things have not changed, and they've absolutely changed. So the idea that you can do things the same old way is the sort of most insane fallacy in a way. So to get people to accept that the world has changed is important, step one, and therefore it means that we probably need to change the way that we're doing things. I saw that there was a comment from Helen Murdoch, I think, on the screen, but it's gone off. So we'll probably leave that until next time, or we'll respond to that individually. So just to say a huge thank you to everyone connected, dialing in. We started doing these back in March. I think we had about 19 people register. We're now over 600 registered on a regular basis for the live streams. We want to keep growing this. So please tell everyone you know about these. The idea is that they're always going to be free. We're always going to focus on doing something which is ultimately of value for you. And especially if you're on the journey of building your skills and your capability as a line manager, then we think that, of course, these have tremendous value for you on a regular basis. So a huge thank you for being involved as part of the live stream this month. And we look forward to sharing with you the one for next month, which we don't know what it's going to be yet because we like to react to what the public's seeing. But we'll see you mid next month. And we may do this next one, I'm hoping, live from Egypt. So I'll be there around this time next month. So look forward to seeing you, hopefully, live from Egypt next month. Thank you very much and see you soon.